1957, Louisiana, the twins who married without knowing and created America's most deformed child. A tale so disturbing that it would reshape our understanding of human biology and the consequences of genetic proximity. In the murky bayous of Terrebonne Parish, where Spanish moss hangs like memories best forgotten, this story remains whispered among the oldest residents, a cautionary tale passed through generations. The year was 1957. Eisenhower occupied the White House, Elvis dominated the airwaves, and in the segregated South, families still kept their secrets buried deeper than their ancestors. It was here, in this atmosphere of rigid social codes and unspoken histories, that the Fontainebleau family saga began to unfold. Martha and Michael Fontainebleau appeared to be just another young couple building their life together in post-war America. They had met at a parish fair in 1955. Martha, a quiet beauty with chestnut hair and unusual amber eyes. Michael, tall and reserved with the same distinctive amber gaze that had drawn them to each other from across the fairgrounds. There was something familiar about him, Martha would later tell authorities. Like I'd known him my whole life. What neither of them knew was that this familiarity wasn't coincidence or fate, it was biology in its most tragic form. Born in 1932 as twins to Eloise Thibodeau, a young, unwed mother who couldn't afford to keep both children during the Great Depression. They were separated at birth through an informal adoption common in those days. Martha went to the childless Hebert family in Lafayette Parish, while Michael was raised by distant Fontainebleau relatives in Houma. Their birth records were minimally documented, as was common for poor families in rural Louisiana at that time. The practice of informal adoptions was widespread during economic hardship, explains Dr. Eleanor Whitman, historian of American family structures at Tulane University, especially in close-knit communities where record-keeping was secondary to survival. These children would often have no idea of their true origins, by all accounts. Martha and Michael's courtship was brief, but intense. They married in spring of 1956, settling in a modest home on the outskirts of Houma. Neighbors described them as mirror images of each other, both with the same walk, the same laugh, the same temperament. They finished each other's sentences, recalled Mabel Gittery, their elderly neighbor at the time. Always thought it was sweet how alike they were. Lord have mercy on us all. We had no idea what that meant. When Martha became pregnant later that year, the couple was overjoyed. Their child, Robert Fontainebleau, was born in January 1957. The delivery room fell silent when the infant emerged. Dr. James Theriot, the attending physician, documented his observations in a medical report that would later become part of a landmark medical study. Infant presents with severe facial deformities, including cleft palate extending beyond normal parameters. Cranial structure appears drastically malformed. Additional anomalies include 6 digits on each hand, fusion of lower extremities, and concerning cardiac irregularities. Have never witnessed such extensive congenital defects in 30 years of practice. Little Robert's condition was so severe that nurses wept. The hospital chaplain was called immediately. The child was not expected to survive the night, but survive he did, beginning a medical odyssey that would eventually expose the truth about his parents' relationship and forever change how medical professionals approach genetic counseling in America. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel to continue this shocking journey into America's hidden history. Hit that subscribe button now to ensure you don't miss what happens. Next, the medical revelations in this case would later shape modern genetic counseling practices and save countless families from similar fates. As Robert Fontainebleau defied medical expectations by surviving his first week, then his first month, physicians from across Louisiana began making discreet visits to the small Houma hospital. The child's constellation of abnormalities was so extensive and specific that specialists recognized something profoundly troubling in his genetic makeup. The pattern of defects suggested an extreme case of genetic homozygosity, noted Dr. Victor LeBlanc in his clinical observations from February 1957. The probability of such extensive recessive gene expression from unrelated parents is virtually impossible. While the science of genetics was still developing in the 1950s, medical professionals understood enough to recognize that Robert's condition pointed to parents with remarkably similar genetic profiles. It would be years before the specific mechanisms were fully understood, but the doctors suspected what would later be confirmed. Martha and Michael shared identical DNA. Meanwhile, the young parents struggled not only with their child's medical needs but with the whispers that followed them through Houma. In the small community, rumors spread quickly about the strange-looking Fontainebleau baby that few had seen but many claimed to know about. People can be cruel, recounted Josephine Boudreau, a family friend who stood by the couple. They'd cross the street when they saw Martha coming with that covered baby carriage, as if misfortune was contagious. By March, Robert's cardiac issues required specialized care available only in New Orleans. It was at Charity Hospital that the full investigation into the family's background began to take shape. Hospital social worker Clara Washington was assigned to help the overwhelmed young parents navigate the medical system and secure financial assistance. Standard procedure included taking family histories, explained Washington in an interview conducted in 1972 for a medical ethics journal. When I began mapping their backgrounds, I noticed peculiar overlaps. Both claimed to be only children, yet described nearly identical childhood homes in different parishes. Both had the same unusual birth date. Both had been told their birth mothers had died in childbirth. As Washington delicately probed deeper, she uncovered that both had been born in the same small maternity home that had closed in 1935. When she mentioned this coincidence to Dr. Harold Jenkins, the hospital's chief of pediatrics, he requested immediate blood typing for the entire family. Blood type analysis was the closest thing we had to genetic testing in those days, Dr. Jenkins later wrote. The parents were identical across all testable blood factors, a statistical improbability for unrelated individuals. While doctors carefully built their case, Martha and Michael devoted themselves entirely to Robert's care. Despite his challenges, the child showed surprising resilience. Martha rarely left his side, learning to suction his malformed airway and position him to ease his labored breathing. She was a remarkable mother, remembered nurse Evangeline Mouton. The way she sang to that child, you'd think he was the most beautiful baby ever born. In her eyes, I suppose he was. Michael worked double shifts at the lumber mill to pay for medicines not covered by charity. Every evening he would arrive at the hospital with small gifts, a tiny stuffed bear, colorful ribbons to hang near Robert's crib, or wildflowers picked from the roadside. They loved that child something fierce, Nurse Mouton said. Makes what came next all the more heartbreaking. In April 1957, Dr. Jenkins convened a private meeting with hospital administrators, the hospital's legal counsel, and an ethicist from Tulane Medical School. The medical evidence strongly suggested that Martha and Michael were biological twins. The doctors faced an unprecedented ethical dilemma, whether to inform the couple of their biological relationship. We debated for hours, recounted Dr. Jenkins. Was it cruel to burden them with this knowledge when they were already suffering so much? Or was it medically necessary information they had a right to know, especially if they considered having more children? As these discussions continued behind closed doors, Robert's condition worsened. His heart, malformed and struggling from birth, began to fail. The medical team performed unprecedented procedures, attempting to correct defects that had never been successfully treated. Throughout those tense weeks, Martha and Michael remained unaware of the doctor's suspicions about their relationship. They focused entirely on their son's survival, oblivious to the genetic tragedy unfolding and the difficult revelations that awaited them. By early May, Robert's condition had stabilized enough for Dr. Jenkins to finally address the situation with Martha and Michael. He requested a private meeting in his office with social worker Clara Washington and hospital chaplain Father Thomas Bergeron present for support. I've rarely faced a more difficult conversation in my medical career, Dr. Jenkins later confided to colleagues. How do you tell two young people that not only is their beloved child suffering because of their unwitting relationship, but that their entire marriage exists in violation of both nature and law? The meeting began with Dr. Jenkins explaining Robert's genetic conditions in simplified terms. He described how certain traits appear when a child receives the same genetic instructions from both parents, and how this was exponentially more likely when parents shared very similar genetic material. Martha, always quick to understand, grasped the implications before they were explicitly stated. Hospital records indicate she suddenly went pale and whispered, "We're related, aren't we?" What followed was a careful unraveling of their histories. The doctor showed them the blood work results and explained their significance. He then shared what Clara Washington had discovered: birth records from St. Mary's Maternity. Home listing twins born to Eloise DeBudo on August 17, 1932, a boy and a girl. Michael couldn't accept it at first, Father Bergeron recalled in a 1967 interview for a medical ethics publication. He kept saying there must be some mistake, that records get mixed up. But Martha... she just went very quiet. Then she said something I'll never forget. "That's why I felt like I'd known you my whole life. Because I had. The documentation was irrefutable. Their birth mother hadn't died in childbirth as both had been told. Eloise Thibodeau had surrendered her twins to separate families during the height of the Depression, with each adoptive family apparently unaware of the other child's existence. If you've been moved by this family's tragedy, I want you to type "I feel for the Fontaines" in the comments below. Your comment acknowledges the profound human cost when family histories are erased and reminds us all of the importance of protecting vulnerable children from circumstances beyond their control. Michael initially stormed out of the meeting, unable to process the revelation. He was found hours later in the hospital chapel, weeping. Martha retreated into a shocked silence that lasted for days, sitting beside Robert's crib and mechanically tending to his needs while barely speaking. The psychological impact was severe, noted Dr. Eleanor Westfield, a psychiatrist called in to assist the family. Beyond the shock of their own relationship, they now carried the burden of knowing they had unintentionally caused their child's suffering. The human mind isn't designed to absorb such trauma all at once. As the couple began processing their new reality, legal complications arose. Their marriage was technically invalid under Louisiana law, which prohibited marriage between siblings. Questions emerged about Robert's legal status and custody. Hospital administration worried about potential legal liability for disclosing the information. Meanwhile, Robert's condition deteriorated again. His heart, already compromised by multiple defects, couldn't sustain his growth. By late May, he was placed on experimental medical treatments available only through Tulane Medical School's pediatric research program. The medical team worked around the clock, remembered Dr. Paul Fontenot, no relation, then a young resident. Not just because the case was medically fascinating, but because we all felt deeply for this family. Their tragedy wasn't of their making. The press caught wind of the story. Though most details remained protected by medical privacy standards of the era. The Homa Courier ran a small article about a child with rare genetic condition receiving experimental treatment, prompting local churches to organize prayer vigils for the unnamed family. Through all this, Martha and Michael faced their reality with gradually increasing strength. Hospital records showed they requested information about genetic counseling, advanced thinking for 1957. They asked difficult questions about what their discovery meant for their future. They showed remarkable courage, Clara Washington noted. Once the initial shock passed, they focused completely on giving Robert whatever time he might have left. They never blamed each other or their circumstances. There was a dignity in how they faced their tragedy that humbled all of us working with them. By June, difficult decisions loomed regarding Robert's care and the couple's future, decisions that would further shake the medical community and leave an indelible mark on everyone involved in their case. As summer settled over Louisiana, bringing oppressive heat to the hospital corridors, Robert's condition reached a critical phase. The experimental treatments had extended his life beyond initial expectations, but his heart simply couldn't support his body's needs. By mid-June, the medical team called Martha and Michael in for yet another difficult conversation. Further interventions would only prolong his suffering, Dr. Jenkins explained gently. His body doesn't have the capacity to heal from these fundamental defects. The heartbroken parents made the impossible decision to move Robert to comfort care only. He was baptized in his hospital crib, with Martha and Michael standing as his parents, despite the complex legal questions surrounding their relationship. "I've witnessed many sacred moments in my years of ministry," Father Bergeron later wrote, "but few as profound as watching these two souls, bound by blood in ways they never chose, commit themselves to loving their child through his final journey." Robert Fontaine passed away on June 22, 1957, just shy of 6 months old. Hospital records note that he died peacefully in Martha's arms, with Michael sitting beside them, his hand on his son's small chest. The funeral was private, attended only by a handful of hospital staff who had grown close to the family. Robert was buried in a small cemetery on the outskirts of New Orleans, his grave marked with a simple stone bearing only his name and dates. For Martha and Michael, grief was complicated by their ongoing legal and identity crisis. Their marriage was technically void under Louisiana law, their home and Homa impossible to return to given the whispers and speculation. They faced not only the loss of their child, but the unraveling of their entire understanding of themselves. The question of what happens next after such a revelation is not addressed in any medical textbook I've encountered, Dr. Westfield noted in her case files. There is no protocol for helping people reconcile such fundamental disruption to their identity. In a surprising development, Eloise Thibodeau, their birth mother, was located through the efforts of Clara Washington. Now in her 40s and living in Baton Rouge, she had rebuilt her life after the painful decision to surrender her twins during the Depression. The hospital arranged a carefully managed meeting in late July. Medical records describe it as emotionally complex but ultimately healing. Eloise explained the circumstances of their birth and separation, how at 19, unmarried and destitute, she had been unable to care for twin infants during the darkest days of the Depression. "I thought about you every day of my life," Eloise told them, according to Clara Washington's notes. "I prayed whoever took you in would tell you about each other someday. I never imagined something like this could happen." This meeting provided Martha and Michael with crucial context for their origins, though it couldn't erase the tragedy they'd experienced. It did, however, give them something neither had ever had, a connection to their biological history. By August, the couple faced practical decisions about their future. Their marriage legally dissolved, they could not continue living as husband and wife. Yet their bond, both biological and emotional, made separation equally unimaginable. What do you do when the person who knows your pain most intimately is the one person society says you cannot be close to? Martha asked Dr. Westfield during a counseling session. "We lost our son. Must we also lose each other?" The medical team, having grown deeply invested in the couple's welfare, worked with social services to develop an unprecedented solution. Legal documents were prepared establishing Martha and Michael as siblings rather than spouses. Housing was arranged in Baton Rouge where they could live in adjacent apartments. Their relationship recategorized but not severed. "We recognized that conventional solutions were inadequate for such an unconventional situation," Clara Washington explained. Their trauma bond required specialized support, not arbitrary separation based on rules that never contemplated such circumstances. By early fall, Martha had secured employment as a hospital records clerk while Michael found work in construction. They began building new lives, not as husband and wife, but as brother and sister navigating shared grief and discovering their twin connection. Their case, while kept confidential at the time, would eventually become a cornerstone study in medical ethics programs across the country. The medical details were documented extensively, with identifying information removed, creating what would later be called the Terrebonne case, one of the most comprehensive early studies of genetic consanguinity in medical literature. As 1957 drew to a close, Martha and Michael faced their first holiday season with their dual loss, both of their child and their marriage. Yet in that loss, they had gained something few could understand: a profound awareness of how biology shapes destiny, and how love endures even when its expression must change. The impact of the Fontano case extended far beyond the family's personal tragedy. Throughout the early 1960s, medical professionals involved in their care began quietly sharing the case's implications with colleagues across the country, forever changing how the medical community approached genetic counseling. Dr. Jenkins, deeply affected by what he'd witnessed, dedicated the remainder of his career to establishing the first formal genetic counseling program in the American South, based at Tulane Medical School. The program developed protocols for family history documentation that would later become standard practice nationwide. What happened to the Fontanas was preventable, Dr. Jenkins stated in a 1963 medical conference, carefully preserving the family's anonymity. With proper documentation and communication between adoption agencies, their paths would never have crossed romantically. Our failure as a medical and social services community led directly to their tragedy. By 1965, Louisiana had implemented new adoption record systems specifically designed to prevent similar cases, requiring more thorough documentation of biological relationships and establishing confidential registries that could identify potential consanguinity without breaching privacy. Martha and Michael's story, though they never sought publicity, became a powerful teaching tool. Medical schools across the country used the anonymized case study to illustrate both the biological consequences of consanguinity and the ethical complexities of medical disclosure. "The Terrebonne case fundamentally changed how we approach genetic medicine," wrote Dr. Margaret Hamilton in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1968. "It demonstrated that family history is not merely supplemental information but critical medical data that can prevent devastating outcomes." As for Martha and Michael themselves, they rebuilt their lives with remarkable resilience. Throughout the 1960s, they maintained their adjacent apartments in Baton Rouge, establishing a brother-sister relationship that neighbors described as extraordinarily close but appropriate to their biological connection. They ate Sunday dinners together, recalled Jean Robichaud, their neighbor from 1962 to 1968, attended church together, helped each other through illnesses, but they were careful to establish separate lives too. Almost like they were rediscovering how to exist as siblings rather than spouses, Martha eventually returned to school, earning her nursing degree in 1964 and specializing in pediatric care. Colleagues noted her exceptional empathy with parents of children with congenital conditions. She had a gift for sitting with families receiving difficult diagnoses, remembered Dr. Charlotte Webb, who worked alongside Martha at Baton Rouge General Hospital. She never shared her personal history with patients, but there was something in her presence that communicated genuine understanding. Michael found purpose in unexpected ways. After working construction for several years, he became involved with a church-based program helping orphaned and abandoned children. By 1967, he had become the program's director, working to ensure that siblings were either adopted together or maintained connections if placed separately. His advocacy changed dozens of children's lives, noted Reverend William Tanner in a 1970 Community Award ceremony. His insistence that biological connections matter, even when circumstances require separation, has become central to our placement philosophy. In 1972, 15 years after Robert's death, Martha and Michael established a small foundation in his name. The Robert Fontenot Memorial Fund provided financial assistance to families traveling for specialized pediatric care, addressing a need they had experienced firsthand. The foundation's establishment marked a turning point in their journey, a transformation of personal tragedy into meaningful action. Though they never publicly shared their full story, their work touched countless families facing similar medical journeys. Medical professionals who knew their history marveled at their resilience. They took circumstances that could have destroyed them completely and found purpose in them. Dr. Westfield noted in her final case notes before retiring in 1975, "Few people could have navigated such a profound disruption of identity with similar grace." By the mid-1970s, advances in genetic science had progressed significantly. The specific genetic mechanisms that had caused Robert's condition were better understood, and screening for recessive genetic disorders was becoming more sophisticated. In 1976, Martha participated anonymously in a research study at Tulane Medical Center, providing blood samples that helped scientists better understand the genetic markers associated with consanguinity. Her contribution to this research helped develop screening tools that would prevent similar tragedies for future generations. Their story represents one of the most profound examples of how hidden family histories can resurface with devastating consequences, and how medical ethics evolved to address such complex human dilemmas. The twins who married without knowing created not only America's most medically significant case of consanguinity, but also a legacy of improved genetic counseling that has protected countless families since. If you've watched this entire story, please leave a comment saying I watched it all, so I can get to know you and understand who truly appreciates the in-depth historical investigations on this channel. If you found this story moving and informative, please hit that subscribe button to support our work uncovering America's hidden histories. Give this video a like if you believe these forgotten stories deserve to be told, and share it with others who appreciate learning about the complex human stories that shaped modern medicine. Your engagement helps ensure these important historical lessons are preserved for future generations.